Hey friends, before we dive into today's stories, I want to talk to you about a topic that affects many of us: hair loss. Now, I've personally known individuals who have struggled with it. 2 out of 3 men experience hair loss, and I know how frustrating and discouraging that could be. But that's where Keeps comes in to save the day. With Keeps, you can address your hair loss without ever leaving your home. No doctor's visits or pharmacy trips needed. Everything is personalized just for you, thanks to the guidance of licensed medical providers. Your treatments are delivered right to your door, and you can choose the delivery schedule that works best for you: 3, 6, or 12 months. Plus, it's typically way more affordable than traditional pharmacy prices. Keeps offers treatments that are clinically proven to work. They've got both FDA-approved options and even a 2-in-1 gel that combines both treatments. Clinical studies show that Keeps treatments are 90% effective at treating hair loss and can increase growth by up to 35%. Whether you're looking to prevent hair loss, stimulate hair growth, or just keep what you've got, Keeps has got you covered. And speaking of coverage, Keeps offers more than just treatments. They've got hair thickening shampoo, conditioner, and styling pomade to keep your hair looking its best. Most Keeps customers start seeing results within just 6 months of starting treatment. And now, here's the real deal. Keeps has helped nearly 1 million guys keep their hair. That's right, nearly 1 million. And with over 4,500 5-star reviews, along with impressive before and after photos from real customers, it's clear that Keeps is loved and trusted by many. And as part of your Keeps treatment plan, you can message your medical provider or the Keeps care team anytime through their secure messaging portal. So, if you're tired of dealing with hair loss and want to take action now, for a special offer to get started, go to keeps.com/letsread or click the link in the description. That's keeps.com/letsread. My name is Sean, and I'm from East London. And I'm writing this on behalf of a very close friend of mine who wishes to remain anonymous. Earlier this year, something happened to him that he couldn't talk about until fairly recently, and when he sat me down and talked me through it, it was one of the most terrifying things I've ever heard. The trouble is, he doesn't want to go to the police about it. I've tried to talk him into it, that he should do it for the sake of saving other people from going through the same nightmare that he did, but he won't, or rather, he can't. And this puts me in a very difficult position. I can't just let it go. I can't have something like that happen to one of my best friends and just think, oh well, chin up and crack on. Something has to be done about it, and since I haven't got the finances or the physique to suit up and boot up like the friggin' Punisher or something, I've had to settle on a much more creative form of retaliation. Full disclosure, I have my friend's full permission to be writing this and sending it to you, because he agrees if there's one thing we can do, it's at least warn people that the same thing might happen to them. At the beginning of this year, my mate, who we'll just call Dave for the sake of ease, got himself a nice little flat near Tower Hamlets. He's been single for a few years and had himself a few quid to spare, so he starts downloading all those dating apps like Tinder and Bumble and all of that. He sets up all of his profiles and sets about swiping left and right, then ends up matching with a nice girl called Charisse. Now Dave has heard all the catfishing horror stories, so he's careful. He doesn't just run out to meet up with his match. He talks to her back and forth for about a week. They move to WhatsApp, they swap pictures and voice notes. Basically, Dave does everything except ask for a scan of her passport and decides that the girl is 100% real. He asks her out, she says yes. They arrange a date and time, and even though he was nervous about getting stood up, Charisse shows up no problem, and they have a nice little evening together. At the end of the night, Dave gets a kiss on the cheek before he sees her into her cab, and then an hour or so later, they swap texts about what a great time they had and how they should do it again sometime. Dave goes to bed thinking that he'd bagged a winner in old Charisse, but he also knew that he'd probably have to wait a week or two before being able to see her again. So, imagine his surprise when Charisse texts him the very next day, asking if he's free for a drink that evening. It's a Sunday, so he's got work the next day, but as long as he doesn't overdo it, he might head off to work the next morning with a bit of a spring in his step, if you know what I mean. Dave asks Charisse where she wants to meet, then suggests a few bars or restaurants, but no. Charisse doesn't want to meet at some trendy wine bar. She wants him to come round to her flat. Now Dave knows he's in the money, so he slaps on a bit of aftershave, calls a taxi, then grabs a bottle of wine on the round. He said it was more the same for a while. Nice bit of music, nice bit of chat, and they finish off the first bottle of wine quite quickly. Dave knows that he should be heading off, and he knows that he shouldn't really be drinking anymore either. But when Charisse asks if he wants to crack open a second bottle before he calls a taxi, he says, why not? So off goes Charisse into the kitchen and comes out saying not to be excited because it's only £6 from the off license round the corner. Dave doesn't care though. He's got other stuff on his mind. So he accepts the glass. They toast to whatever they toasted to, and then that's the last thing Dave really remembers until he woke up. The next thing he remembers, he's waking up on the same couch that he was drinking on God knows how long before. The only thing is, he can't move, and he can't speak. He can't move because someone's tied his arms and legs, but the reason he can't speak is because he's still under the effects of whatever Charisse, if that even was her real name, slipped into his drink. He said he was trying to say something, but all that would come out were those nonsensical groans. There was no one else in the room with him, and he knows that he's been mugged, so the only thing he can think of is to start shouting for help. A second later, the door bursts open, and at first Dave thinks, hallelujah, someone's come to rescue me. But when he sees the balaclava on the guy's head, he knows that he's still in a shed load of trouble. The guy in the mask, who also got a pair of gloves on, covers Dave's mouth with his hand, then tells him to stop making noises or he's dead. As he says that, he brings this massive knife into view. Not quite machete size, but still freaking massive and scary, so Dave does as he's told and just shuts up. His biggest fear was that the bloke was gonna film himself cutting his head off or something, so when the masked man started asking for the code to Dave's phone, he says it was almost a relief. Only trouble was, he was still so woozy that he couldn't get all 6 numbers out without slurring his words. The bloke starts slapping him, open-palmed, and over again round the face, shouting something like, "Tell me your PIN, tell me your effing PIN code now." Dave's trying, but he still can't do it, especially not with this guy smacking him around the gills. But he can't tell him that, so the guy thinks that he's just messing with him and trying to keep his mouth shut. He suddenly stops hitting him, walks out of the room, then walks back in with one of those electric stun guns. He told Dave, well, this will wake you up a bit, and then started shocking him. And the worst thing is, he was right. I suppose the pain is a great motivator like that, and after a few shocks, Dave was able to give the guy his PIN code. He had to do the same thing for his banking app, and he said that he felt sick knowing that he was about to get rinsed of all his savings. But when the masked man tried to transfer all of his savings, he kept getting error message saying it wasn't possible. The most he could transfer was something like $1,000, and then he started getting messages saying that he had to call the fraud department. Dave said that he was hoping that the bloke would just take the money and run, so to speak, but he rang the fraud line at God knows what time and made Dave take them through the steps of unlocking all of his funds. He lost tens of thousands of pounds, thinking that he was never going to see it again, and this absolute scumbag is literally celebrating in front of him, talking about all the stuff he's going to buy with Dave's money. Dave said he was fighting back tears, that it was the single most terrifying and humiliating thing he's ever experienced. But he said all the emotion was like relief. Yeah, he'd been tricked, drugged, stun-gunned, then robbed blind, but it was done. The guy had his money, and he was most likely about to leave. But before he did, he needed a little bit of insurance, as he put it. The guy disappears into the kitchen, then comes back with a spatula that had a condom pulled over the handle. I can't even imagine how painful it would have been, and Dave wouldn't talk about what happened after that. But I know the guy stuck it where the sun don't shine, and then took a photo for good measure. Dave was told that if he went to the police or reported the bank transaction as fraud, the pictures would be sent to everyone he knew. That's how it ended up being confirmed that Charisse was in on the whole thing, because when the guy told him, "We know who you are, we know where you live," who else could that information have come from? So, that all happening coincides with Dave just disappearing for a bit. He gave just about every excuse in the book, then after about a month of being busy all the time, he showed back up again, just like normal. He didn't seem like there was anything wrong with him. I did notice that he was drinking a bit heavier down at the pub on snooker nights, but I didn't think enough of it to ask him if he was all right. We operated on a culture of if there's something you want to talk about, you'll talk about it. There's none of that girly, "You'll be all right, babe. Are you sure you're all right, babe?" We just talk when we want to. Now on paper, that's a great system, isn't it? But in practice, when you couple it with a certain kind of man's unwillingness to display any weakness or admit that he's in any kind of trouble, well, you end up with a recipe for a nervous breakdown. Dave was putting on a brave face for us, but at home, he was crushed. He'd heard that he'd be able to get money back from the bank, but also heard that it involved going to the police about what had happened. They needed to confirm a crime had actually been committed before the bank went ahead and refunded his money. He told me he wanted to, more than anything in fact, but all it took for him to close the claim was to imagine those pictures of him plastered all over his neighbor's front door. After all of his savings didn't quite seem so important anymore. But then, it was his life savings though. The pair of us are only in our early 30s, so hardly a whole life's worth of savings, but it was still a good few quid, so stressing about it made him ill, literally. Dave disappeared again for a bit just before summer, and again, we took him at his word that he was just busy. But then, when I happened to bump into him at Aldi, he'd lost weight. He smelled like he hadn't washed, and he was a mess, as in he was visibly ill, but still, he kept denying that there was anything wrong with him. He had me ringing his dear old mum up trying to find out what was happening, and that's when she tells me that she's also worried sick about him because Dave's not been acting himself for ages. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. I drove round to that nice, still relatively new flat of his at a time that I knew that he'd be home, and I basically ended up confronting him in as soft a way as possible as to why he was acting so strange. And that's when he broke down. He didn't tell me everything all at once. It wasn't as neat as I put it all together here, but over the course of that Saturday evening, then long into the night, Dave broke down everything that had happened over a crate of lager. It sounds a bit horrible, me saying so, but at first, I was actually relieved when he said that he got robbed. I was trying to steady myself to hear something like he got cancer or some other terminal thing, so hearing absolutely anything else felt like a weird kind of win. And that was just my initial reaction, though. And the more detail he gave me, the more I realized that it wasn't just some online scam or a street mugging or something like that. These people had destroyed him. Financially, mentally, physically. They took one of my best mates and turned him into someone I could barely recognize. There's not much else to really say. I want to be able to respect his decision, and I've tried telling him that. Say they really did post those pictures of him, and that says a lot more about them than it ever does about him. He's the victim in all of this, and there's no one in their right mind who'd ever think otherwise. But he can't bring himself to go to the police. At least, he's not ready to do that right now. I feel like the only things I can do are, firstly, just be a friend, and passively support him until he's ready to be brave and talk to the police. But secondly, and with his blessing of course, we can warn other people that this is a thing that's happening to people. There are people out there, absolute scum of the earth type people, who are using dating apps to do sickening, evil things to people who are only trying to bring a bit of love into their lives. First things first, I didn't realize how hard this was going to be until I actually sat down to write it. You see, I've been a fan of you for a while now, and I've always thought that it would be cool to hear a story of mine featured in a video. But now that I actually have something to write to you about, I can't seem to find the words. I guess when something traumatic happens to us, we sort of compartmentalize it, as they say. Then, unless you have the cash to get a good therapist, you spend however long it takes processing it until you finally just sort of forget about it. It's like a suitcase that you stuff away in a closet, unpacking each item of clothing one at a time over the course of months, years, or even decades. Maybe writing this up will speed up the process along for me. Maybe it won't, but either way, I've started now, so I guess I'll finish. In about March or April of 2022, I decided that I was going to have a hot boy summer. I'd been single. Me and my college girlfriend broke up and hadn't dated seriously since about 2017 or 18, but I was also in no position to do so either. I was overweight, my apartment was a total man cave, and I had zero confidence talking to women. And so if I was going to date, I needed what one girl later referred to as a glow-up. I got a gym membership, got myself an actual haircut, and started paying attention to what I was eating. Then over the course of the next 2 months or so, I worked on bettering myself in as many facets as possible. It's incredible what some new clothes, a little weight loss, and a clean apartment can do for a guy's self-confidence. Then once I actually had some, I downloaded a bunch of dating apps and got to swiping. I matched with a girl, we arranged a date, I was awkward as hell, and she unmatched me that night. It sucked, but I knew I had to persevere, take the rejection on the chin, and not let it make me all bitter or whatever. It took 2 more disappointing dates, but on the 4th, I finally seemed to nail it. I matched with a girl named Natalie. We chatted for a while, and when we felt that mutual chemistry, we arranged to go out sometime. Since I didn't figure the date was going really anywhere, I was engaged but also relaxed and kind of aloof. I didn't talk about myself too much, didn't ask too many questions. I just went with the flow and tried to just be myself, and not whatever I thought the girl wanted me to be. And apparently, Natalie was into it. We really hit it off, and when it came time for her to call an Uber, we seemed very eager to organize a second date. It might sound cynical, but I didn't really take her at her word. More than one girl had told me that she'd be in touch, then I'd arrived back at my apartment to find that she'd unmatched me while I was riding home. I was happy with the date, but more because I felt that I'd finally found my rhythm, if that makes sense. I felt like I'd finally completed my transformation from undateable neckbeard to fully grown pizza, as I heard you say in one of your streams one time. Even if Natalie didn't call me back, I knew that I'd be able to get another date eventually, and that was one of the greatest feelings of my life, really. And then, Natalie did call me back, which was an equally awesome feeling, and we arranged another date for the week that followed. Day of the date, we step out, had a few drinks, and we stay in this one place until closing time. We actually planned to hit up other places, but we just talked and kept ordering drinks, and then the next we knew, it was closing time. We were both pretty drunk, but not nearly drunk enough to call it a night, so we went stumbling through the streets, laughing at nothing and trying to find another place to get some drinks. It might sound kind of lame to some people, but that night was literally one of the high points in my life so far. I could actually be the kind of person a woman wanted to be around. I could be that smooth operator I never in a million years thought I could be. But then to go from one of the highest points in my life to the literal lowest in the space of a few minutes, well, let's just say that was quite something. Me and Natalie turned down a quieter street. Then we're about halfway down when I hear some guy behind me say, "Hey buddy, got a light?" I stopped, turned around and told the guy that I didn't smoke. He didn't look like much of anything, just a 20-something white kid in a hoodie and a ball cap. But when I told him I didn't smoke, he asked if I had a spare couple of bucks so he could buy himself a lighter. There was no way any cigarette lighter cost more than $1. I mean, I've never smoked, but I know a scam when I hear one. I just apologized, told him that I didn't have any change on me, but then the kid turns to Natalie and starts asking her for money, only he does it way more aggressively. When she says no, the kid tries to snatch at her purse, so entirely on instinct I gave the kid a shove and then tried to put myself in between him and Natalie. And that's when he stabbed me. I didn't see him get the knife out, but I knew right away that I'd been stabbed. It didn't hurt when he did it, but it didn't feel like any other punch I'd ever taken. It felt cold, like a cold punch, and then he grabbed Natalie's purse, pulled it out of her grip, and then ran off. I remember actually saying out loud, "Did that dude just stab me?" Because there was no blood on my shirt, but then when I lifted it up, that's when I saw the first blood, and that's when I felt my legs just stop working suddenly. I knew I had to put pressure on the wound, so I kept both hands clamped on the hole in my stomach while Natalie pulled my phone out of my pocket since hers had just been stolen. I remember lying on my back, kind of looking down and up at her as she went into my pocket, and how I was trying not to look at all the blood coming out from underneath my hands. By the time Natalie was talking to the 911 dispatcher, a bunch of other people had noticed me lying there with blood on my hands and ran over to try to help out until the EMTs showed up. It's weird because at the time, I remember being weirdly calm about the whole thing. The guy who put his jacket over me, who said that he had some first aid training, kept telling me, "You're gonna do fine, buddy. Just keep calm." And it was only then that I actually started to worry that I wasn't going to be okay. Maybe I've just seen too many movies, but when the first aid dude starts insisting that I'm going to be fine, I started to panic. Ironic, I know, but to me, you only say that to people who are in serious trouble and need to be kept calm so they don't panic and bleed out everywhere. I tried my best to keep cool, I really did, but the whole time while we were waiting for the EMTs, I had this little voice in my head saying, "This is it. This is how you die." Didn't even make it through my 20s. I got even more frightened when I realized how cold I was starting to feel. I was convinced that I was bleeding to death, that I had only minutes before I was about to pass out and just never wake up again. I've heard people say that, when the thought occurred to them, like when they legitimately thought that they were going to die, they felt this calming wave wash over them. I did not feel that same feeling of calm. Instead, I was the most scared I've ever been in my entire life, and it was only when the EMTs showed up and I was still awake that I started to think that I might actually survive. And when one of them told me that the bleeding wasn't that bad, but that I definitely need surgery, I actually started to feel just a little less panicked. I knew whatever came next would suck harder than anything had sucked before, but I wasn't going to die, and I think I could write all day and still not sum up the feelings of pure relief that I felt. Maybe the EMTs gave me an injection of something to calm me down, or maybe it was the oxygen mask working its magic. But either way, I remember sinking into the bed that they put me on and thinking to myself, thank God. And then when I arrived at the hospital, they prepped me for surgery, and after making me breathe through a mask, someone started counting backwards from then with me. I remember getting to about 6, 5, 4 part, and then that's when my memory just goes blank. When I woke up, I had a tube coming out of my stomach, and I've been told that they fitted me with a stoma. And for those that don't know, if a large section of your bowel isn't functioning correctly, you're sometimes fitted with a stoma and an accompanying colostomy bag. If you don't know what a colostomy bag is, go look it up. I'm not Google, but I was fitted with one, and it sucked beyond belief. The pain management was definitely the worst thing. Smelling like poop most days was one thing, but the pain literally made me want to just pass out and not wake up until it was gone. Laughing hurt, coughing hurt, moving hurt, everything freaking hurt, and it just sucked the joy out of meal times. About 2 months later, I had to have a second surgery to get the stoma reversed, which thankfully was a complete success and put me firmly on the road to recovery. Now I'm doing much better these days. Me and Natalie actually ended up dating for a while, but the relationship just naturally ran its course. She's the only girl I've ever dated who I've actually stayed friends with, and I know what we share was forged that night as I tried to keep my own guts in while lying on the cold concrete. I know what happened to me was just a case of very bad fortune, but in some ways, I don't feel that's the case. Yes, I'm still paying off the remainder of my medical bills, even after getting financial aid, but money is nothing compared to life, love, and liberty. And when I think of it like that, I consider myself a very lucky man. So, for context, I'm 21, I'm a girl, and I'm fun-sized, meaning I'm terrified of any man over 5'5". Also, this happened late last year when I was 20. Anyways, last year all I wanted for Christmas was a boyfriend, so I downloaded all the apps, uploaded some decent photos of myself, and got some matches. I found this guy called Aaron, who had the whole gym bro thing going on for him, but also wasn't just some total bum who made no money. He had game too, I'll give it to him. So we arranged to go out one time for a few drinks to see where things went. I show up to our little date looking pretty good, and he's looking really handsome too, with this big expensive looking watch on his wrist that I notice. We get some drinks, we're vibing, and then we start talking about work and stuff and how I wanted to get into being an influencer, maybe like a foodie on TikTok or something. But then I'm talking and he's looking at me because where the hell else is he gonna look? But then he suddenly stops looking at me, looks a little over my shoulder, and then his face changes completely. 1 second he's looking suave and sexy, and the next second he looked like he was about to puke. I didn't even have time to turn around to see what he was looking at when I feel these hands in my hair. Then the next second, they were pulling me back off of my chair, or no, it must have been a stool from how I fell right back, and then bam, my head hit the floor, and it winded me pretty bad. The next thing I remember was something smashing down into my face again and again, and how one of his hits landed right on my nose and made it crunch. In my whole life, I'd never felt anything as painful as that. It was like my whole face was on fire, and I tried to just curl up into a ball until whoever it was hitting me stopped doing it. At first, the pain was so bad that I couldn't even open my eyes, and all I could hear was screaming from the people around me. But the loudest screams of all of them were coming from a girl, and from all the wild crap she was yelling, I could tell that it was her that had been the one striking me. I only got one good look at her before the guy I'd been on a date with dragged her out of the place, and then I was mobbed by people trying to give me first aid and stuff like that while someone else was screaming to call 911. The guy I'd been on a date with didn't come back, and when the ambulance finally showed up, they took me to the emergency room. I remember being so upset that the guy just disappeared, but that was my first clue as to what was actually going on. At the hospital, the doctors had to x-ray my nose to see how bad the damage was, but they gave me a whole bunch of pain meds too, so I was just kind of out of it by then. The worst part was when they had to set my nose. It didn't hurt or whatever, but I could feel the broken bones in my nose moving around when they did, and it was legitimately one of the grossest things I'd ever experienced. She then stuffed a bunch of gauze up my nostrils, and then that was just my life for a few weeks, sounding crazy dumb with a bunch of cotton stuffed up my nose to keep it set. And while it was healing, I had plenty of time to sit around feeling sorry for myself. The guy I'd been on the date with had unmatched me on Tinder, but I did a little stalking, and I was able to find him on Instagram. He'd made it private, but when my friend sent him a random request, he accepted it, and that's how we found out that the girl who attacked me was this guy's girlfriend. It looked like she untagged herself from a bunch of his posts, but not all of them. And there she was in maybe 5 or 6 of them, posing with the guy in a way that made it obvious that they were a couple. Long story short, I ended up pressing charges, and she ended up going to jail. I understand that she was also kind of a victim in that situation, but I also lost my ability to feel sorry for her the moment she decided to drag me off that bar stool and break my nose. The guy is trash too, and I know he'll get his karma someday, but it should have been him that the girl beat the crap out of, not me. I had no idea he wasn't single, and if that had been me walking in on my boyfriend on a date with another girl, I'd like to think that I'd show a little sisterly solidarity and punch him in the face, and not her. I used to swipe on Tinder a whole lot during 2018 and 2019. At first it was soul-destroying, but then I learned to kind of roll with the punches, and I started to get some pretty good matches. I matched with this one girl who I'll call Sarah, and after we hit it off, we arranged to go out for coffee. Coffee led to cocktails, and cocktails led to dancing. Then one thing led to another, and I ended up back at her place. We spent the night together, fell asleep in each other's arms, then planned to get some breakfast together the next morning. The next morning, I woke up and then rolled out of bed to go use the bathroom. But then, literally, as I'm peeing, I hear a key sliding into the front door of Sarah's apartment. My first thought was, oh, maybe she's got a roommate. But it wouldn't be the first time that I've had an awkward encounter in my underwear with a girl's roommate or a friend. So I just got ready to be like, hey, I'm Sarah's friend. Sorry to make this our first time meeting, etc., etc. I finish peeing, start washing my hands, and that's when I hear a man's voice coming from down the hallway. I couldn't make out exactly what they were saying, but it kind of sounded like a question, and I'm still very much in this is Sarah's roommate state of mind. But then, when the question got louder and angrier, and I heard the distinct, "Who's in the effing bathroom, Sarah?" I knew this wasn't her roommate. I hear heavy footsteps coming up the hallway, then a fist or foot smashes into the bathroom door. I'd had the good sense to lock it, so there was no way this dude was getting inside without some serious force. But then I figured that he kind of knew that too, because I soon heard him walking up the stairs to where I'm pretty sure the kitchen was located in this girl's apartment. All I was thinking was, this is my moment to get out of here. I was prepared to run out of there in nothing but my underwear, no phone or wallet or keys, nothing, because going into the bedroom to get them would trap me in the apartment and mean that I was most certainly in for a whooping. But then, if this guy was Sarah's boyfriend, or God forbid, her husband or something, then there was a chance that he wouldn't just beat me up. There was a chance that he would quite literally murder me. So, like I was saying, I hear the guy walk off down the hall, so I unlock the bathroom door, then rush out into the hallway, but I'm just not fast enough. I see the guy coming down the hallway at me just as I'm trying to unlock the door to the apartment, and the dude has this big, shiny kitchen knife in his hand. I think that was probably the scariest moment of my life. Like, I really did think that I was about to get stabbed to death right there in the hallway wearing nothing but my freaking underwear. I begged this dude for my life, and I'm not even ashamed to say it. All I wanted in the world was to get out of there and pretend the whole thing never happened. I pleaded with the guy not to stab me, and he didn't. Instead, he looked me dead in the eyes and says, "Get out of my way." The craziest thing about this whole story to me personally is how I felt this sudden switch happen in my head. As I said before, all I wanted to do was get out of there, but then when I realized what the dude was actually about to do, it's like I physically couldn't let that happen. I can barely even explain it, even in hindsight, but I guess subconsciously I felt like if I just ran out of the apartment, if I did get out of the way, it'd have Sarah's blood on my hands. I also think that I just couldn't let the dude throw his whole life away like that over one incident of cheating, and that's definitely the angle that I took at that time, because I remember just saying to this guy over and over, "Don't do it, man. It's not worth it. She's not worth it." He actually tried to barge past me at one point, and I wouldn't move, which seems absolutely insane looking back on it, because he could have just easily plunged that knife into my chest right there and then. But by some miracle, he didn't. He stopped trying to get past me and asked me in this shaky voice, Did you know?" And when I shook my head, he stormed out of the apartment. Sarah just sat on the bed crying while I gathered up my stuff, and all I said to her was, "You should get out of here." And you can bet that I wanted to say a lot more than that, but the whole of my soul was just screaming to just get out of there, so I grabbed my stuff, got dressed, left her crying on the bed. My heart was still pounding when I arrived at the nearest subway station, and it was only once I was on the train that I realized how bad I smelled. Obviously, I hadn't had time to shower and put on any body spray, but I don't know how the hell this works scientifically, but being so scared had this weirdly metallic funk rising from my armpits. I think that's what people mean when they say that animals can smell fear, or how fear has a certain sting to it. Either way, I felt like human garbage, like actual human garbage. but still feeling weirdly grateful that I even walked out of that apartment to begin with. During the summer of 2016, 23-year-old university student Molly Mikalsen decided to try her hand at the popular cell phone-based dating app, TINDER. Molly was a second-year university student who was passionately pursuing a degree in health and fitness. Friends described her as an exercise fanatic, but added that her other great passion was people. Molly quite frequently professed a desire to pursue a career in personal training, not just to help people look better, but to help them feel better too. She just had that effect on people, a close friend later said. She liked making people happy, so everyone gravitated towards her. That's why she had so many friends. Like many young women her age, Molly had no trouble attracting the attention of the opposite sex, and that was especially so online. The only problem was finding a man that she felt equally attracted to, and in 25-year-old Joshua Stimson, Molly quite literally met her match. Joshua had spent his formative years in Stoke-on-Trent, but had moved southeast to Medway in Kent following his graduation from secondary school. He then held down a series of low-paying jobs in warehouses and call centers, yet his coworkers seemed to have vastly different memories of him. Some described a charming, charismatic young man who excelled at whatever task he was presented with, but others recalled a distinctly darker, broodier side to Joshua, one that deeply unnerved them whenever it arose. According to friends, Molly and Josh chatted online for the better part of 3 months before meeting in person, but by that period, she was smitten. It was her first proper boyfriend, another close friend explained. So she was head over heels for him. Everything about him made her smile. But Molly wasn't just attracted to Joshua's charm or his good looks. She was attracted to his flaws, too. Having grown up battling anxiety and eating disorders, Molly was terrified that potential partners would view the conditions as so-called red flags. So when Joshua confessed to having been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, Molly believed that she'd found a kindred spirit. She asked me not to judge Josh by his mental health conditions, and I didn't, her mother later said. But I wondered if Molly was able to take on other people's issues on top of dealing with her own. After voicing her concerns, Molly told her mother that she understood her reticence, but given she and Josh had undergone similar troubles in their lives, she claimed that she and Josh could help each other out. Molly's attitude towards Joshua's mental health issues is certainly admirable, but there was just one problem. He was lying. Josh didn't have bipolar disorder. In fact, he hadn't received any formal diagnosis whatsoever. His claim of being a bipolar sufferer was nothing but a sordid attempt to manipulate young Molly, and it worked. Over the course of the spring of 2017, Josh and Molly began seeing each other regularly, and at first, they seemed perfectly content. Molly even brought Josh home to meet her parents, Joanne and Doug, who later described him as seemingly perfectly normal. But as the months went on, the relationship gained their solid seal of approval. In April 2017, Joshua took part in the London Marathon and raised hundreds of pounds for a British bipolar charity in the process. Molly and her parents drove him into London, then waited along the route to cheer him along. It was every bit the blossoming romance, but it soon began to wither. One day, in early May of 2017, Molly approached her mother seeking advice. She claimed that since the trip into London for Josh's marathon, his demands for attention had been ever increasing, and in her words, she felt smothered. It seemed as though he didn't have any friends and was a bit of a loner, Joanne McLaren later said. He wanted Molly to himself, wasn't interested in making any friends of his own, and got jealous whenever Molly spent time with hers. Joanne added that over time, Joshua's behavior became even more concerning. I remember how he'd sometimes just turn up at our house uninvited, and at times when Molly wanted to have some time on her own to study, he would come and lie on her bed so he knew where she was and what she was doing. Neither Molly nor her parents knew it, but Josh had actually reduced the hours on his weekly warehouse contract in order to spend time with the subject of his ever-increasing obsession. And it wasn't long until that obsession became frighteningly unhealthy. Sometime in late May or early June of 2017, Molly invited Joshua to her aunt's 60th birthday party in the neighboring county of Essex. It was an opportunity for Josh to impress Molly's wider family, but it was one he squandered spectacularly. Molly's mother later said that at one point, her daughter left Josh alone at a table, then went off to talk to some distant cousins. Josh seemed furious. He sat in a seat, seething with jealousy, staring angrily at Molly as she happily chatted with family. Later that evening, the group returned to a nearby hotel with Josh and Molly checking into one room while the latter's parents checked into another. Less than an hour later, Molly's mother received an ominous text message from her daughter. "I don't feel safe with him," it read. It's not clear how that evening's incident resolved itself, but according to Molly's mother, the mood in the car during the journey back to Kent was a tense one. It seemed Josh and Molly's honeymoon period was well and truly over, and that the breakdown of their relationship was imminent. But when it came to doing the deed, Molly found that she didn't have the heart. It was typical of Molly, a close friend later said. She was always putting everyone before herself. She didn't know how to break up with Josh without breaking his heart. Even though he'd scared her, she still really cared about him. And so, to facilitate the breakup in as safe a manner as possible, Molly's friend came up with a rather ingenious plan. They'd invite Molly and Josh on a night out, somewhere very public and preferably somewhere with security staff. Then after a few shots to steady her nerves and the emotional support of all her close friends, Molly would take Josh aside and tell him it was over. All in all, it was a good, solid strategy, but it was one that relied on Josh fearing public humiliation. The grown-up thing to do would be to take the breakup on the chin, refrain from making a scene, then walk out of the bar with his head held high. But that was not what Josh chose to do. Molly's friends watched as she took her soon-to-be ex-boyfriend aside and delivered the bad news. They figured that he'd take it badly, but the reality was nothing less than shocking. Josh began pacing back and forth while screaming, "She's finished with me, she's finished with me," and continued his tirade until the nightclub's door staff was forced to remove him from the premises. Molly was mortified, but her friend's plan worked, and with their emotional support net firmly in place, they were there to catch their old friend's fall. They tried their best to cheer Molly up, and to an extent it worked. But friends recalled that Molly had a melancholy about her that night, almost like she knew what was coming. Over the next few weeks, Joshua waged a campaign of online harassment against his former girlfriend. He bombarded her with text messages from several different sources, then set up a series of social media profiles for use in his campaign. No matter how many accounts Molly blocked, Joshua seemed to remain one step ahead of her, and his methods grew sickeningly creative. At one point, Josh set up an anonymous Facebook group entitled something to the effect of "Get Molly Help." Hidden behind a facade of compassion, Joshua made a series of faceless and baseless claims that Molly was suffering from a cocaine addiction. He added almost every one of Molly's friends, relatives, and online contacts to the group, and ensured that a minor panic took place before the girl herself frantically refuted the claims. What I just described was just one of the many ways Josh terrorized Molly in the aftermath of their breakup, but most tended to be a digital form of harassment, which meant forwarding them to the police took just a click of a button. Seeing as Josh had no prior convictions, the police could only give him a warning, but a People's Constable Philpott from Kent Police issued a very stern one via telephone. The harassment abated for a few days, but during that time, Joshua seemed to issue a chilling decree via a cryptic Facebook post. "More to come," he said. With Joshua having backed off a little, Molly felt safe enough to attend a dinner date with friends. Just minutes prior to her arrival, she posted details of the dinner date on Snapchat, believing she'd successfully blocked all social media profiles associated with her former boyfriend. She was wrong. At one point, Molly looked up to see Josh staring through the large front window of the restaurant directly at her. Friends urged her to pay no attention, but it was impossible. Molly felt so unsafe that she called a taxi and asked a member of the restaurant's waitstaff to escort her to the car. The incident repeated itself just days later on the evening of June 28th, when Joshua appeared in a pub Molly and her friends were drinking in. Not only was Josh stalking his ex-girlfriend online, he was stalking her friends too. Once again, Molly felt her safety had been compromised and fled the pub after calling a taxi. Yet despite this, there seemed to have been a general feeling that Josh was beginning to move on. Direct online harassment had all but ceased, and Josh had been spotted in the company of another girl, which must have been an encouraging indicator by any measure. Yet in hindsight, the lull in Josh's psychotic behavior appears to have been little but the calm before the storm. The next morning, on June 29th of 2017, Molly McLaren traveled to her local gym in the dockside area of Medway. A member of staff saw that she had entered the building at around 10:10 a.m. Then 35 minutes later, Molly sent a text message to her mother. "Mom," it said, "he's here, at the gym." Realizing that Josh was re-escalating his parasocial tendencies, Molly's mother advised her to return home immediately. She took the advice, returned to the girls' changing rooms for a shower, then exited the gym and walked to the car. At 11:02, Molly sent another text message to a group chat that she and her friends participated in. "It feels like I'm looking over my shoulder all the time," it read. It was the last text message she ever sent. Just as Molly tried to start up her car's engine, Joshua Stimson appeared from out of nowhere and yanked open her car door. Before Molly could even react, Josh plunged a small paring knife into her chest. Then, after pulling the keys from her grip, he began stabbing her over and over and over again. When a member of the public happened to notice the frenzied attack, they called out and began to intervene. Josh then drew the blade of the paring knife across Molly's throat, putting any chance of her survival firmly out of reach. He then locked himself in Molly's car, sat next to her still warm corpse, and awaited the arrival of police officers, telling them, "You want me," as he calmly handed himself over. Once he was secure, paramedics rushed to Molly's aid, but it was too late, and she was officially pronounced dead at exactly 11:43 a.m. Her family were beyond devastated, and the grief was only compounded when Josh began to plead not guilty, claiming temporary insanity and that he'd had no memory of the attack whatsoever. His defense team argued that all he wanted was a fair trial, but those who knew him had other ideas. Josh had punished Molly, and now he was going to punish her parents by dragging the matter through the nation's courts. During the trial, the prosecution dredged up dirt from Josh's previous relationships, arguing that both his previous 2 long-term girlfriends knew all about his controlling and possessive nature. And Alexandra Dale told the court that Joshua had once slashed the tires of her car after she threatened to leave him, and had once threatened to drown her during a Caribbean vacation. Leah Hubbard, Joshua's second ex-girlfriend, told the court that during one particularly vicious argument, Joshua had spat in her face before proceeding to physically abuse her. The court was also shown pages upon pages worth of digital evidence, which depicted Joshua Stimson as a dangerously unhinged individual who felt an unhealthy possessiveness over the women in his life. At the trial's conclusion on February 6th of 2018, the jury took less than 4 hours to find Josh guilty of murder, after which a judge sentenced him to 26 years in prison. She told the court that this was an act of wickedness. You took away Molly's life quite deliberately in the most vicious fashion. You were determined to punish her for ending the relationship with you. You were seeking revenge. She was 23 years old, beautiful and intelligent. Her family's grief and anguish is raw and apparent for everyone to see. You are a highly dangerous young man, and you will pose a very considerable risk to women for a very considerable period in the future. But Molly's parents were not content with Josh's punishment alone. They wanted to make sure that no one would be able to commit the same act of callous evil ever again. They campaigned tirelessly for what's known as Domestic Homicide Review, which reviewed how Molly's case was dealt with by the relevant authorities. The subsequent report determined that Staffordshire police failed to adequately investigate allegations made against Joshua 4 years prior to Molly's murder. At this time, he was dating the previously mentioned Alexandra Dale, but her harassment via text messages wasn't recorded as a crime, and Joshua was merely sent a text by a police officer warning him to stay away. When Josh moved to Kent, Staffordshire police failed to notify their Kentish counterparts of Joshua's past, meaning he was not present on any of their local databases. Another section of the report reads as follows: the potential relevance of Staffordshire police's involvement hinges on whether, had things been done differently, Kent police might have found out about the 2013 incident in Staffordshire when Molly reported her concerns about Joshua in 2017. This could have been achieved in 2 ways. First, if Joshua had been named as a suspect for a crime, a search of the Police National Database, the PND, would have revealed this. Second, if he had been cautioned or convicted of a criminal offense, this would have been recorded on the Police National Computer, or the PNC. And as a result of the Domestic Homicide Review, Staffordshire Police officially changed its policies surrounding criminal harassment, meaning officers are now required to record stalking as a crime, even if victims don't want to take matters further. If this were to occur in the United States, it might be given a moniker such as Molly's Law, and it's a shame that the British police don't follow suit. After all, such a concrete change in the way the police do their jobs will undoubtedly have an effect on the way they handle future cases of harassment. We can only hope that in some sense, Molly's death was not in vain, and that her parents' efforts have secured the safety and prosperity of many young women to come. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m., and there are super fun live streams every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday night. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/LetsReadOfficial, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks offered for the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories in big compilations and save huge on data. Located anywhere you listen to podcasts. All links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, Pete Davidson dumped me. Wow.